Hi, guys, and welcome back to Not Your Mama's Murder, the podcast where each week we discuss a different true crime case. I'm Elisa Alexis Bird Hill. I don't know why I used my full name, and this week we will be talking about the murder of Gladys Ricart. Now, before I get into this week's episode, I do want to talk a little bit about my trip to Louisiana. I was down there for my sweet friend's wedding, which, hey Kaylee, if you're listening, Miss Cashin, you were the most beautiful bride, and I loved spending your wedding day with you. Anyways, while I was there celebrating Kaylee, I did take a couple of hours, and I actually visited the Museum of Death in New Orleans, French Quarter, which, a small side note, I love. I took 4 years of French, and it's no secret I love the culture and the history of France, and most importantly, I love their architecture, especially somewhere in like Louisiana where they were so heavily influenced by the French. It's so beautiful to see. I think the only true French architecture we have nearby here is the Biltmore Estate, which I do love. But growing up so close, I've kind of seen it all and been multiple times. So if you're ever in the area of New Orleans, I do recommend checking out the French Quarter and the Museum of Death. Personally, for me, minus Bourbon Street, that was just not my jam. I was there in the middle of the day, and it still felt like a giant frat party. And if you love that vibe, great for you. It's just not for me. So I'll be setting that one out next time. A little bit about the museum itself. It is a collection of artifacts from crime scenes, serial killers. There's a lot of crime scene photos as well. I will say a lot of the things that you see can be graphic, so if you were easily sickened by the sight of blood or gore, maybe just skip it. But if you can handle it, it is a very cathartic experience as someone who studies true crime to see a lot of the things they had. They had a lot of the stories posted for you, so you would know the background of what you were looking at, which I think would be very helpful for someone who even doesn't have a lot of background in true crime and just kind of enjoys it casually. I probably could have spent the entire day there and still not have read everything. I wish I could share photos with you, but unfortunately and understandably, they do have a no photography rule. But I do want to tell you about a couple of my favorite artifacts that I saw while I was there. My absolute favorite, and for sure a future topic I'll cover, is Dr. Kevorkian's first and second rendition of his suicide machine. Some of you may know him as Dr. Death. He was the doctor from the University of Michigan, which go blue, that was punished for performing assisted suicides for people who were terminally ill. I'm not going to go too much into it right now because that's not what this episode is about, but hot take, I don't necessarily disagree with him. Some of the other artifacts that I liked a lot were the handwritten letters. They're always a hit for me. I've also visited the Alcatraz East Crime Museum in Pigeon Forge a few times, which I also highly recommend. And there too, it was the handwritten notes that stuck out to me. To see the criminals' mindsets in the moment while they were imprisoned and who they deemed important enough to be writing, it always just makes an impact on me. At the Museum of Death, they had typed and handwritten letters to a friend of David Berkowitz, who, for those of you who don't know, is Son of Sam, where, in a joking manner, he was explaining to the lady he was writing how to poison a coworker and get away with it. And so that was a wild thing to see with my own eyes. Of course, at the museum, there were bones, there was lots of prison art, there were articles of clothing worn by death row inmates, a lot of really interesting things to see. So if you have the stomach for it and you're ever in the area, I highly recommend checking it out. There is another one also in California. That one is still on my list and hopefully will be checked off in the coming years. And for the record, yes, I realize that kind of thing is not everyone's cup of tea. Being into true crime doesn't mean you want to see those type of things, and that's totally okay too. Now, as for the episode today, as I mentioned, it is Gladys Ricart is our victim's name, and as promised, it is a theme. Augustine Garcia was born into a lower middle class family in the Dominican Republic and came to the U.S. as a teenager. He worked hard for years and pushed himself and eventually earned 2 PhDs. One was in international affairs and the other was in international law. He was living his American dream. He was very hardworking. A lot of his time was spent at work, which was in Washington Heights, New York. He always dressed nice and wanted to outwardly present an image of success and wealth, and people looked up to him, and he wanted them to. He wanted to be a leader and a powerful member of the Dominican community. Augustine even had his eye on running for office in New York. He was close to the mayor and had lots of other high-powered friends. However, he could also be seen as aggressive and hard-headed. Some said he was always the loudest voice in the room, which I have some favorite quotes about that makes me want to tell Augustine. My favorite of which is, "Confidence is silent, insecurities are loud." And also, the loudest person in the room usually has the least to say and the most to prove. And it does seem like both of those kind of fit our friend Augustine here. He was described as often being competitive when unnecessary, and it was said that once he had his mind on something, he could not be swayed, no matter what. It was clear that he had a fear of rejection, which likely came from his childhood. He was one of 9 children, so he often felt ignored or neglected, especially in the instance where, when he was young, his mother moved to Puerto Rico, leaving him in the Dominican Republic, which I think could absolutely explain his need for control and power over those around him. Despite all of these characteristics, he was also often described as charming, charismatic, captivating, and engaging. He could draw anyone in and make them listen. This is likely how he landed his wife, Lourdes. Though not much is known about Lourdes, records show that she was married to Augustine for 15 years and they had 2 sons together. However, the amount of time that Augustine dedicated to work and not his family began to cause problems. The pressure of being ignored most of the time and raising their 2 young children alone weighed on Lourdes, and eventually she asked for a divorce. Augustine wanted to try and make it work, but within 6 months of her asking, the divorce was final. Because there is now no wife or kids to distract him, Augustine buried his feelings and worked even more than he had before. Now, I do want to say here that this drive and determination is a good quality to have. I have said multiple times that one of the hottest things about my husband is his work ethic. We were real poor when we started out. We were very young. We both worked in fast food. We had our daughter a little earlier than we planned, and so we had a lot to figure out and a little money to make it work, but we always did. And a lot of that is due to his pure drive to be successful no matter what it takes. These are good qualities. Even though, yes, I have been one to complain about him needing a better work-life balance at times, I admittedly prefer a man that is determined to pour his entire self into being useful and productive. I personally can't stand a man that won't work or won't hold a job. I know every family is different, and some people choose to have moms be the breadwinner and dads stay at home with the kids. And if that's your setup and that works for you, that's great. I love that. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about a man who needs to be working or helping financially to make ends meet, and he won't. So his family is struggling or, making sacrifices because of it. And likely that kind of man doesn't help with the kids anyways. So, all of that to say, a lot of these qualities in Augustine aren't bad qualities. They just need to be applied better. On top of all of his work in the political system and within the Dominican community and within the law community, Augustine also ran multiple businesses, including a travel agency and a bodega. Because of this, he often carried large amounts of cash with him, so he also carried a firearm with him for protection. That firearm was a .38 caliber handgun. He did have a license to lawfully carry, and it is said that crime was high in New York City during this time, so it made sense to ensure his protection. I can't help but ask, was it for protection, or in this specific case, was it about intimidation? But not my place to say. Augustine eventually gets lonely without Lourdes and decides it's time to put himself out there and attempt to meet someone and possibly date again. And as if he had manifested it himself, he then meets 31-year-old Gladys Ricart. On the subway, on his way to work, he saw her, he thought she was beautiful, and gave her his number. Ironically, she too had moved from the Dominican Republic to the United States. Gladys was born on October 15th, 1960, which, sad note, October 15th is my daddy's birthday. Gladys was one of 4 children raised by her mother, Anna. Anna chose to keep the identity of each of her children's fathers a secret and raised them on her own. Gladys is described as vibrant, smart, the life of the party, a family woman who lit up a room. And guys, we have to stop saying people light up a room. It's a surefire way to know something bad will happen to them. I literally have a shirt that says, "does not light up a room," for this reason. A family member of mine, Megan, who you will likely hear a lot about on this podcast, she's very important to me, big part of my life. She's a very hippie-esque person. She's very go with the flow, flies by the seat of her pants. I've conditioned myself to never refer to her as a free spirit, even though that's the way she leans, because free spirits and people who light up a room always go missing or get murdered. That's just what happens. Anyways, along with those things, Gladys was hardworking, determined, and she had big dreams for herself, including starting a family, which, like me, maybe came a little earlier than Gladys thought it would. She got pregnant at 18, and like her mother, chose to raise her son, who she named Davis, on her own. Even though this path is different than the one she originally envisioned for herself, Gladys loved being a mom, and she poured everything she had into building a wonderful life for them both. Part of that plan included moving to New York City. So her sister moved there. She followed her sister. And then almost 10 years after relocating to New York is when Gladys met Augustine on that subway, and her future was changed forever. After thinking about it and talking it over with a friend who was actually familiar with Augustine, she decided to give him a call. Why not? She did think he was handsome, and she loved that he was out doing things for the Dominican population inside New York City. So she called him up, and they set up a first date. In an effort to impress Gladys, Augustine takes her to his new office in Washington Heights for their first date. Gladys was a professional in her own right. She had an accounting degree. As I said before, she was a very hard worker. This made her really understand the amount of time Augustine would need to dedicate to work to be successful. Plus, I will say it probably helps that her son was a teenager by this point, so she wasn't raising young children, basically as a married single mother like his ex Lourdes would have been. Either way, Gladys seemed to be the perfect woman for Augustine and his busy career. While being understanding and supportive, she was also well-educated, mild-mannered, and absolutely beautiful. Gladys was the type that you couldn't help but respect, and Augustine gave her that respect. Their love was very noticeable to those around them. Their love was very noticeable to those around them, even after only 2 short months of dating. People said they were always smitten with each other. Gladys attended every event she could to support Augustine. They appeared to be the it couple, and his popularity actually increased by having Gladys with him. She was a reflection of him, or a trophy, and he loved to be seen with her. After about 2 years of dating, Gladys was ready to move to the next level and make their relationship official. She wanted to get married. Like any little girl, she had dreams of a big, beautiful white wedding, and she loved Augustine, so she felt like he would be a fantastic husband. Augustine, on the other hand, didn't agree. Not because he didn't love Gladys, but just because he had been married before, and he didn't want the added burden or pressure of putting the more serious title on it and being man and wife. When he saw Gladys looking at bridal magazines, he told her to stop and to let the idea go. And so she did. Gladys figured he just wasn't ready yet, and things were great with them as is, so it would not hurt to wait a little longer. However, Augustine's actions and his words did not match. Soon after this interaction, he began introducing Gladys as his wife, rather than his girlfriend or his partner, as he had in the past. Now, I don't know what was going through Gladys's head when this happened, but to me, in my opinion, this reads as though he thought all she wanted was the title of wife, and that if he just started calling her that, she would be satisfied and not bring up the actual wedding aspect again. Along with calling her his wife, he also did invite Gladys and her son Davis to move in with him. This is around 1993. Gladys was excited for this step and hoped that it would be moving them even closer to an actual wedding. Things were great at first. Her and Davis adjusted well and were enjoying staying with Augustine, but that all changed pretty quick. It became clear early on that Augustine wasn't accustomed to sharing the house with another male. He clearly started trying to assert dominance over Davis. He would do small, controlling things like making both of them only watch what he wanted on TV, and while watching TV, he would sit in between Gladys and Davis so that they couldn't be too close. It was clear that he always wanted to be the center of attention, everywhere, with everyone, including other women, which is probably not a surprise to anyone listening. After moving in together, Gladys quickly caught on to the cheating. And this actually leads me to wonder if he was always working late with Lourdes too, or if sometimes he was away from home cheating. My guess is he was cheating then as well. Gladys confronts Augustine about his behavior, and he, of course, denied that any cheating was happening. When Gladys refused to take that for an answer because she knew better and she pushed harder, Augustine exploded in rage and pulled his handgun that he was wearing in his holster on her while continuing to yell at her. At that point, Gladys walked away and locked herself in their bedroom. While it wasn't the first time that she had upset him, or that he had even raised his voice, it was the first time she was truly afraid of him. Of course, as it always happens, Augustine was able to lure her out of the bedroom with "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, and it'll never happen again." Gladys decided to forgive Augustine and attempt to move forward, trying to rebuild the trust in their relationship. She did, however, decide that living together was just no longer for the best, and she and Davis did move back into a place of their own. Augustine turned up the charm, but something in Gladys just wouldn't allow her to fully let him back in or trust him. This made her patience with his insecure and controlling behavior very thin. She no longer tolerated him calling her constantly or randomly showing up at her place unannounced. Gladys made it very clear that she needed some distance and to start living her life as Gladys again rather than just Augustine's arm candy. This brought back all of Augustine's abandonment issues from his first wife and even his mother, and this is exactly what he was afraid of happening. Unfortunately, because of that, it caused Augustine to spiral, and the more he spiraled, the more Gladys pulled away, and the more Gladys pulled away, the more outlandish Augustine would begin to act. It was a very vicious, toxic, and dangerous cycle at this point. Augustine started wanting to know exactly where Gladys would be at all times and who she would be with. Now, it is important to remember that this is the late 90s, long before we were openly sharing our location with everyone all the time on an iPhone. And Davis, along with other family and friends, began to notice the behavior and how it would affect Gladys and pointed out to her, reminding her that behavior like that was not okay and that she was better than being treated and controlled in those ways, and that she just outright deserved better. Meanwhile, surprise to no one, right? Augustine is still out cheating. I think we call that projection. This time, he's not even really hiding it. He would go out into public on dates often, and one day, Gladys happened to be out and spot him. And she broke up with him immediately and told him to never contact her again, which we loved that for her. After 7.5 years of dating, of lies and cheating and manipulation, Gladys was finally free. And Augustine and his ego were broken and angry. And unfortunately, that anger increased when he learned that not long after their breakup, Gladys was already dating again. She was seeing a man named James Preston. James was 37 and was also an accountant like Gladys. He had never been married, but he very much wanted to be. He also did music on the side, and Gladys loved music, so they bonded quickly over that. After just 2 months of dating, James proposed to Gladys. They were both head over heels for each other. They had similar goals and dreams, both wanted to get married and have children. Moving fast just felt right for all they wanted to achieve in life. The relationship with James was just what Gladys needed and wanted, and her friend said that he healed a part of her that was broken. She felt in her gut, though, that Augustine would be upset by the news of their engagement, so she attempted to keep it a secret for that reason. What she didn't know is that Augustine had already been watching her every move since the moment she broke up with him. He would drive past her house multiple times a day, or even just sit out front for hours, trying to catch a glimpse of anyone coming or going. Any cars he saw, he was writing down their license plate to see who they belonged to, not just in her driveway, anywhere on her whole block, just in case she had someone park down the street and walk to her home. At this point, Augustine is a full-fledged stalker. Further proof of him being a stalker is the fact that he would often leave gifts outside Gladys's door. Sorry, I lost my place. Okay. Further proof of this is that Augustine would often leave gifts outside Gladys's door for her. This is pretty common in stalking, and it helps the perp feel as though they are actually a good person for leaving a gift, while also making the victim aware that they are being watched and making them feel afraid. When Gladys wouldn't respond to the gifts, Augustine would respond with anger and violence. He would beat on her door and yell, as well as throw rocks at and one time even through her windows. On the day that he broke her window, Gladys was afraid for her life and Davis's, so she called the police. The police responded, but because she was afraid of further upsetting him, she didn't press charges, nor did she take out a restraining order. She was happy and ready to just leave Augustine in her past, and she thought that the brush with the police would do the trick in getting him to leave her alone. And don't we all wish that it were that easy every time a man was being threatening to us? Finally, 6 weeks later, it was time for the day Gladys had been dreaming of since she was a little girl. It was her wedding day. While James was at the church getting ready and waiting to meet his beautiful bride at the altar, Gladys was at home, living out her fairy tale wedding day, getting ready with some friends and family. But this is a true crime podcast, so of course things can't be great for too long. I guess somewhere through the grapevine, Augustine had learned what day the wedding would be on and made several laps around Gladys's neighborhood before eventually stopping across the street. Gladys was unaware because she was only focused on enjoying this day that she had so long awaited. As Gladys was finishing getting ready and the photographer was about to snap some photos before heading to the church to say I do, Augustine walked into her home, pulled his .38 caliber handgun, and began shooting Gladys in the head. Gladys's wedding videographer caught the entire shooting on film. That video would later be shown to the jury at trial. And I was going to say this later, but I'm going to go ahead and say it now. I highly suggest everyone go and watch the wedding video. Obviously, watch the version with the shooting removed. But Gladys was really just absolutely gorgeous, and you can see the happiness radiating off of her that her wedding day was finally here. You could tell she was just so happy. As the shooting was occurring, Augustine was quickly tackled and taken down by Juan, which is Gladys's brother, which this actually prevented an attempt from him to reload the pistol with extra bullets that he had in his pocket. Unfortunately, though, Gladys had already passed away from the other shots. She passed away in her living room, in her wedding dress, surrounded by her loved ones. Augustine was thankfully immediately detained. Detectives that worked the case said that the scene of Gladys's death was one of the worst ones they had seen, and that Augustine was one of the most repulsive people they had sat across from at the interview table. Augustine said in his interview that he couldn't remember what happened. Gladys was his girlfriend, and he was just stopping by to visit. He wasn't sure why she was in a wedding dress, and he definitely didn't shoot her. I guess the adrenaline was too high, and he didn't pay enough attention to realize that the whole thing was recorded. He was very smug and arrogant, and he tried to throw around his name and reputation thinking it would help him. It didn't. He was charged with the first-degree premeditated murder of Gladys Ricart. In October of 2001, Augustine went to trial, which, can we just take a minute to think about the people of New York City, New Jersey area in October of 2001? What they had all been through and where their lives were at the time? I commend all the members of that jury for being able to serve on a murder trial less than a month after 9/11. Anyway, Augustine's defense was that it was a crime of passion, which the jury rejected, and they found him guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with a possibility of parole after 30 years, which is coming up in 2031. He has filed multiple appeals, even as recently as 2024, all of which have been denied. He is still being held at the New Jersey Correctional Facility. Gladys's murder made a big impact. 1 year after her death, on September 26, 2000, the Brides March Against Domestic Violence was created. This march remembers those victims who have been lost to domestic violence, and it is in support of survivors. It happens every year on September 26th, so this year will be the 26th year. Those who walk for the march do so in a wedding dress as a representation of how Gladys's most exciting day was stolen from her due to domestic violence. I highly recommend anyone who is interested in this case to watch the episode of Unraveled that covers it. That is on Discovery Plus. It is season 2, episode 5, entitled Forever Mine. I personally think this is a classic case of if I can't have her, nobody will. I will say I'm interested to know why he had this serious of a reaction to her leaving after only 7.5 years of dating and no marriage. But he didn't seem to mind quite as much when Lourdes left him after being married for 15 years. I can't help but wonder if it was because he knew that he could still use the kids that he shared with Lourdes as leverage over her in some way. And he didn't have that with Gladys, so she could just cut ties and be done with him. I do think that it's important to remember that it takes an average of 7 times for an abused woman to leave her abuser. It's difficult to understand why they would stay if you have never been through it. I can say honestly that I actually lost a very dear friendship of mine because I was just too young and dumb to understand why she couldn't just stay away from her abuser. I regret the reaction I had to finding out that she had gone back to him every day. I have talked to her and cleared the air since then, and obviously I made sure to get educated on the subject. But her feeling of being unsupported when she needed it most can never be taken back, and I hate that a whole lot. I hate that I made her feel that way in the moment because she was being abused and manipulated, and it was his fault, not hers. And I somewhat took it out on her. And so I hate that. And if you're listening and you know this is about you, I have said it before, but I'll say it again. I am truly, deeply sorry for the reaction that young me gave you back then. With that being said, no one deserves to be physically, verbally, emotionally, or financially abused. If you or someone you know needs help, please call the Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-7233. The Domestic Violence Hotline's phone number, along with the suicide prevention number and Crime Stoppers for anonymous reporting of crimes, are always in the show notes. Now, like I said, if you didn't pick up on it, the episode had a little bit of a wedding theme, a wedding day murder in honor of Kaylee's wedding. And I didn't mention it in the story, but Kaylee actually married a man named James as well. I had no idea that the husband's name in this story, when I started researching and writing, was James. I wanted to do something wedding focused, and when I learned that she was marrying James Preston that day, I knew I had chosen right, which nobody tell Kaylee's James that I called him by his government name, because that's not what I actually call him, but that's a different story for a different day. Also, I think I'm actually going to post some visuals on social media this week, really just because Gladys was just so beautiful on her wedding day, and I think that deserves to be shared. And then I'll post some things from the trip to Louisiana and things like that. Let me know if that's something you like. I would love to have more engagements on social media with you guys and get to know the listeners. So definitely let me know if that's something you like, and maybe if it's something I should continue to do for each episode. And then just a reminder that there will be a new episode of In the in the headlines coming your way later this week, so be sure to check that out. I will see you then.